Today we're going to be going over the as-is clause and the use of an as-is clause. Since 2010, the car purchase agreements have included the words as-is. Though the car purchase agreements have never obligated sellers to make or pay for repairs, the as-is clause was added at the request of anxious sellers and agents. However, the effect of an as-is provision is in fact quite limited. This training session aims to clarify the actual significance and advantages of the as-is provision and explain its use within the car purchase agreements. Are the car purchase agreements as-is contracts? All of the car purchase agreements state that the property is sold in as-is condition. Specifically, the contracts say that the property is sold as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. In the RPA, for example, this exact language is found in paragraph 11. So you will see top line, paragraph 11 of the RPA, condition of the property. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, the property is sold in as is in present physical condition. Is it necessary for the seller to include additional language in the purchase agreement to ensure that the property is sold as is? The language in car contracts is sufficient. There is no need to add as-is clause or line item into a counteroffer or addendum. Does the as-is clause eliminate any obligation on the part of the seller to make any repairs whatsoever? Under the terms of the car contracts, the seller is obligated to maintain the property in its condition as of the date of acceptance. If the property is damaged during escrow, as long as the buyer was not at fault for causing the damage, the seller will likely be obligated to repair it prior to close. Is the seller also required to make repairs for state and local retrofit requirements? In most transactions, there will be state and sometimes local point of sale retrofit requirements, which may require repairs to be made to the property despite the as-is clause. For example, state law requires the seller in most transactions to certify that the water heater is braced and the smoke detectors are properly installed. If these point of sale requirements are not complied with, then repair work must typically be done prior to close of escrow. The seller may negotiate to shift the cost to the buyer and require the buyer to make or hire someone to make repairs if necessary. However, the conservative risk management approach is for the seller to make these repairs, since it is the seller who must certify compliance regardless of who actually performs repairs. Does the as-is clause relieve the seller of the obligation of having to make disclosures? The seller is obligated to fill out any disclosures by law regardless of the as-is clause. Some disclosures, such as the transfer disclosure statement, are not waivable by law. Indeed, there is even a case which specifically held that an as-is addendum does not constitute a waiver of the TDS. Even where there are no mandated disclosures, the seller is obligated by law and all car contracts to disclose any material facts and defects that affect the value or desirability of the property. And this obligation is not negated by the as-is clause. So here we have paragraph 11 of the RPA. Section A says seller shall, within the time specified in paragraph 14A, disclose known material facts and defects affecting the property, including known insurance claims within the past 5 years, and make any and all other disclosures required by law. Does an as-is contract mean that the buyer has waived their contingencies for investigations? The contingencies within the car purchase agreements, along with their cancellation rights and description of how they are removed, are spelled out in great detail. The mere statement that the property is sold in as-is in no way constitutes a waiver of any of those contingencies. Does an as-is contract mean that the buyer has waived their rights to investigate the property? The as-is clause only touches upon the condition of the property. It does not speak to the buyer's right to investigate it. Thus, an as-is clause does not limit the buyer's investigation rights. If the seller wishes to limit the buyer's inspection rights or limit the inspection contingency, that should be clearly stated in the contract. So what exactly does the as-is provision in the car contracts accomplish? How does it benefit the seller? The main function of the as-is provision is to relieve the seller of any obligation to pay for or make repairs with certain limited expectations, or exceptions. Additionally, as-is addendum benefits the seller as follows. It puts buyers on notice that the seller is making no warranties about the quality or condition of the property. It is sort of a red flag that the property is not perfect and should be carefully inspected by the buyer. It means that for resale property, any warranties must be express. And it relieves the seller from liability for defects in the property's condition of which the seller did not have knowledge and therefore could not disclose and that were not concealed by fraud or misrepresentation. Does the as-is clause relieve the seller from the liability for active misrepresentations or knowing failure to disclose? The as-is provision doesn't relieve the seller from liability for active misrepresentations or a failure to disclose material information about the property that the seller knew. Given the obligation for the seller in most transactions to fill out the TDS and the contractual obligation to fill out the seller property questionnaire, or at very least to fill out the exempt seller disclosure, the seller will generally end up disclosing all known material facts to buyer. Thanks for viewing. For more training videos, we have a full library in the back office at riserealtyoffice.com. Look in the training section for all of the previous training videos and for new ones that come out each week.